Welcome to the College Sports Insider, presented by the NCAA. I'm Corbin McGuire with NCAA Communications. And today's guest, frankly, is much better at this than I am. A senior swimmer for West Virginia and host of Queer Mountaineers. I'm pleased to welcome Kayla Gagnon. Kayla, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Of course. First off, it's a crazy time, obviously, with everything that's going on with the coronavirus and social injustice. There's just a lot going on in our country. How are you right now, just as a student athlete who's had kind of everything thrown at her? Just how are you handling all of this?
Yeah, well, when it came to COVID, I remember we were actually at a swim meet back in March. A couple of us were in Cleveland competing in a meet. We just swam the morning session, and I remember I was running late for the meeting, actually. We had a meeting downstairs in the lobby. So, my roommate and I were, scrambling to get out. We had all of our stuff packed up. We had our competition suits ready. We were ready to, leave the hotel to go to the final session that night, and I was going to swim for the first time in the relay. So we get downstairs. We missed most of the meeting. But the only thing we missed, really, was that we were going back to Morgantown. We were going back to Morgantown because the rest of the meet had been canceled. The original setup for the meet had no spectators or anything, so it was just all the teams on deck competing. And then, we swam one session, we come back, and we leave that night. Literally, they said, okay, we're gonna go back to your rooms, pack up your things. The rest of the meet's canceled. We're going back home. At really kind of the gravity of the situation worldwide, and especially in the United States, really started to hit when we literally canceled our entire meet to go on a bus and go back to Morgantown and essentially back home, because before we went for that meet, they extended spring break an extra week, and we didn't know what was going to happen next, so kind of crazy how that all happened.
Yeah, no doubt, but I'm glad to hear you're doing well and kind of getting readjusted to this new normal we're all going through. But I want to transition to the main reason we asked you to come on the show today. You have your own podcast, and it's a very unique one. So I want to ask, first off, can you kind of just give me the origin story of kind of where it came about and why you started it?
Absolutely. So my podcast is called Queer Mountaineers. It's basically all about the LGBTQ plus community and its allies in West Virginia, but I've extended it now to have a wider radius with the region of Appalachia. So I started this my summer of my freshman year going into my sophomore year. So I've been working on this for about 2 years now. And I was just writing, I had this whole notebook, which I still have, of how I wanted this podcast to go, what kind of guests I wanted to have on it. And the reason why I created the podcast, originally was kind of to get a better touch for this community that I was, just getting into. Because at the time I was just starting to come out to my family, just starting to come out to friends, because, I was being in college has allowed me to be a bit more confident and independent and accepting and loving my identity as a lesbian. And so with this podcast, I really wanted to help connect with members of my community, doing something that I was learning how to do, which was journalism, interviewing people and connecting people on that level. So creating the podcast, I just took a chance. I reached out to the director of the LGBTQ Plus Center, Dr. Chris Mayo, and we had, a conversation in the library. I literally booked a room. I bought 2 microphones off of Amazon, connected them to my computer, and recorded the whole thing on GarageBand. And then I started to learn a little bit more about how the studio in our Media Innovation Center, which we have on our Evansdale campus, and how that works, and how to get your podcast on there, how to, as a student, I have free access to it. And, that obviously made things a lot easier. I didn't have to worry about technical issues as much. There's some very helpful people that work in the Media Innovation Center that help me set up when I go to record in that studio. But as I started to do the podcast, so season 1, going into season 2, I started to really understand how important a podcast like this was, because, when it comes to representation of the LGBTQ plus community in media, it's very focused on people in the cities, where rural areas like in Appalachia and other regions of the South, for instance, it's always treated as this horrible, unaccepting, unfriendly place to live, and it's always something to escape. but that's, not true. Like, for instance, in West Virginia, in the last year that I've been doing like this podcast, I've seen pride events show up in a bunch of different small towns in West Virginia, Parkersburg, Morgantown, like Marion County, like all of these places, not just Charleston, not just like, bigger cities. These small towns are starting to have pride events. Towns are passing ordinances to protect LGBTQ plus individuals. This was all before the Supreme Court, just, yesterday, like ruled that LGBTQ people cannot be fired for being LGBTQ. Um, and, and seeing how West Virginia is portrayed in the media, especially with like LGBTQ issues, like when Eric Porterfield, for instance, he was a representative in the House of Delegates from Mercer County. He said that he compared the LGBTQ plus community to the KKK, and that got all over national news. People saying all these things about like West Virginians being hillbillies, West Virginians being backwards, things like that. And as someone who's not from West Virginia, I heard all of that before I even went to school there. But getting to know people there, especially through this podcast, has really shown me that, we need to definitely change the narrative and, show the reality of being queer in West Virginia. Is it like it can be a little bit scary to be visibly queer in West Virginia? There is no doubt about that. But you're starting to see more acceptance. I mean, look at what just happened with the Supreme Court, like that's huge. That is historic. So, and seeing Rosemary Ketchum was just elected to the Wheeling City Council. She's an openly trans woman, the first openly trans person to win an election and get a position in office in West Virginia. That is huge. That cannot be underestimated. So the podcast is just a way to show the beauty of being queer in West Virginia and Appalachia. And I'm so proud to have like a small like role in this, in media, like to create a space that wasn't there before.
That's amazing. And I'm curious if your why has changed. You mentioned kind of the origins and why you wanted to start it. Has that at all shifted or enhanced as you've kind of gone through it?
Yeah. So, my original idea was to kind of like form connections with my community, and absolutely I formed connections with the community. There is no doubt. And I still want to form connections with the community without a doubt. But now it's starting to show, like as I went through it, like I said before, it started to show kind of the importance of having a queer podcast like that, like having, a place that focuses on the issues of queer West Virginians and queer Appalachians. It's there's not that many news sources out there that are like that. I mean, there is Queer Appalachia, which is they produce their own like zine and they share the art and news of queer people in all of Appalachia. But I haven't really seen too many like queer lensed like podcasts in that case. And I have actually had one of the people from Queer Appalachia on the podcast back in season 1, so that was pretty cool.
I want to ask just about some of the podcast episodes in general. Has there been a conversation that you personally have taken the most away from, or an episode that you had the most impact on yourself, now that you look back on it?
Yeah, that's very hard to think because there were so many awesome conversations that I've had over the years. Like I said, like it's been forever. It's only 2 years old, but it's really, some of my favorite episodes have been from, like one of my favorites is from Delegate Danielle Walker. She was the season 2, episode 1 premiere. That was the first episode I've ever recorded where I got like choked up in the middle of it. I don't know if you know Danielle Walker, but she is the delegate representative for District 51, which includes Morgantown. She is a strong, badass Black woman, speaks up for like so many marginalized communities. Like she has lived through so much, and all of her experiences have helped her to become an incredible leader, an incredible speaker, and it was such an honor to have her on my podcast. And talking to, for instance, Ash Cutright. Sorry, they changed their last name. But Ash Cutright is they are the president of Morgantown Pride. It was really cool to be able to interview them 2 times, actually. And they are, like I said, they're the president of Morgantown Pride, and it was really cool to be able to talk to them about what went into creating the first ever Morgantown Pride event. That happened back in 2019, a year ago. Like there were, it was so cool to be able to experience. That was my first ever Pride, actually. I'd never been to a Pride event before that. So being able to kind of learn more about what went into all of the, struggle and hard work that went into creating that event was really impactful as someone who was experiencing their first Pride in Morgantown, and as someone who, is like learning more about the queer community in West Virginia. And that's really helped me to cement a good personal relationship with Ash. And I'm really looking forward to doing an episode with other members of the Morgantown Pride board, especially since Pride this year got moved to, I believe it's Labor Day weekend. It was originally supposed to be back in April, but unfortunately COVID and safety reasons, it was not able to happen. And another good episode actually hasn't been released yet. So I really made an effort to include Black voices during this time. I definitely needed to do better in the past, but now's a good, the best time to start was yesterday, but the next best time to start is to start today. I probably butchered that quote by somebody, but you know what I mean. He's a poet from, he goes to Marshall University, and, I had never heard of this person before he reached out to me, and we had a great conversation about like literature and the impact of it with like activism and stuff, especially now, like for instance, the New York Times bestseller list was consisted of all of these different books on anti-racism, and we had a great conversation about that. He even read his poetry on the podcast, and I cannot wait to share that with everyone because like I got chills listening to it. And like he had such beautiful words, and it was so fun to talk to him about that and what went into these poetry. So I can't wait to share that episode.
Well, you're an expert. You're already teasing future episodes just to make sure people are tuning in. I love it. You mentioned some of the experiences and the lessons you've gained as a part of this podcast. The Pride being one of them, Pride event being one of them. How would you say you've grown or what you've gained as a result of this podcast? What are some, personal things that you've taken away?
Yeah, it was a great way to be able to take what I was learning in class about interviewing skills and about editing. It was a great way to practice those skills and amplify them. And as for like personal things, it's taught me to be a better listener. Not just I love talking. I enjoy talking with people. I get so excited when I have a good engaging conversation, but it's taught me sometimes it's great to just shut up and listen to what someone else has to say. You don't always have to include your opinion. And honestly, that's a valuable lesson that all of us can learn, especially now with like these Black Lives Matter protests, and people are starting to collectively wake up to racism that's kind of been baked into our society. Being able to listen is such a valuable thing that we can do right now. White allies can do. Read resources written by Black writers. Watch movies starring Black actors written by Black people. Like just being able to listen is incredibly valuable because a lot of the times, certain people are always able to have the mic. And something I've learned as a podcast person, as a media, person working in media, is to pass the mic to someone who doesn't often get the ability to have that platform and to be able to speak. So it's been an honor to be able to give this platform, give this space to someone else. And I think that's incredibly important for me to do right now during these times where there's so much change. It's not just crazy. I will say crazy maybe not be the right word to describe it. Tumultuous maybe, but I think now a lot with like the pandemic and with these protests, I think a lot of people are starting to wake up with some of the problems that have always existed. And I think that it's very uncomfortable. Change is always uncomfortable, but I think that with this discomfort, we can make things better. So it's taught me so much. Being a podcaster has taught me so much about how to listen, how to understand other people, and how to amplify those voices that don't often get heard.
Of course, it's so well thought out. And I mean, you come from New Jersey, correct?
Yes, I do.
I'm curious. You obviously went to West Virginia because you enjoyed the recruiting process. It was a place you wanted to go, but you've also, part of your podcast was starting locally and really getting to know the community on a really in-depth level. What have you learned about that community through this process, and especially the LGBTQ community?
Yeah. So, doing this podcast has allowed me a lot of really great connections to people in the community. I did a video project for school that I was able to use my platform with my podcast to be able to get people to participate in. And so, one of the questions I had like a set of like 5 or 6 questions that I asked every single person. And one of those questions was, why do you stay? West Virginia is kind of experiencing in like a decline in population, especially young people around my age. When kids, for example, you live in West Virginia, you go to WVU or Marshall or any of the other universities in the state, and then you take your knowledge and go somewhere else with it. And I understand, especially with queer people and queer people of color who grow up in this state, I can understand why they want to leave. And I think that's, something that the state, I think that with having more acceptance in government and in local governments, I think that'll help keep people in the state. But one of the questions I always asked was, why do you stay? And one of the common answers was, I love this place. I love the people. I love the community. I love how friendly everyone is. I love the mountains. And the most important and probably the most poignant common answer I got was like, I love this place. If I love this place so much, why wouldn't I want to stay and change it? And that's probably the most valuable thing I've learned about this community is its resilience, but also like it's determined to make things better for the people that come after them. That is definitely something that's powerful. And, yeah, I'm starting to get choked up thinking about it. That's one of the most valuable things I've learned about this community since creating this podcast, for sure.
That is powerful. I do want to ask just what's the feedback been like? What have you heard from people who have listened, and have you opened some minds of people who maybe were uneducated or just didn't know much about this community?
Yeah. So as for I've received a lot of positive feedback from people in the queer community in West Virginia and allies. I'm not sure about people who haven't, I haven't heard too much from people who didn't really know much about the queer community before listening to this podcast. I think a lot of my audience consists of a lot of queer folks who kind of just want to be able to hear from people who are similar to them when it comes to experiencing growing up queer in West Virginia, for instance. The feedback has been amazing. I went to Morgantown Pride the first time. I wasn't just there as a person who was participating in the festivities. I was actually there to help promote my podcast. They actually offered me a table there, and I had my buttons. I had like these Queer Mountaineer buttons like on my table. I was giving out stickers, like rainbow tattoos, and like just talking with people about the podcast. And, I still get surprised when people come up to me and say, oh, I've listened to your podcast. I think your podcast is really cool. I always get surprised by that still. I have like 300 followers now on Instagram, close to, I think it's about 300, and like 100 something on, Twitter and stuff. And I'm still surprised that I get the engagement that I do. But it's so much more meaningful when you get to see someone in person. Oh my God, I love your podcast. I'm so excited to, be able to meet you. I'm just little of me just trying to put something cool out there. So that means so much that people think it's cool too, One of my favorite moments is when I went to Parkersburg Pride. I was actually invited by the 2 people who helped found Parkersburg Pride after I did an interview with them, season finale for season 1. And they invited me to Parkersburg. I got a tent. I had my own little table set up. And the coolest thing was that this family came up, and then they said okay, let's get a picture with the Queer Mountaineer. So I was like, oh my God, I was, I know I live a celebrity, but hey, people know me and want to take a picture with me. And, especially when they said referred me as the Queer Mountaineer, I'm like, oh my God, I should have gotten buckskins or something, taking pictures, taking selfies with people who, love the symbol, that's something that my university is well known for with the Mountaineer. It's the one of the most recognizable mascots out there. So kind of having a little tiny sliver of that, but queer, I'm like, ooh, this is so cool. Yeah, so I've had some really great engagement. And I'm actually a little sad this year with Pride not being able to meet these people again and go to other Pride events in the state and be able to celebrate with them. But People are doing Pride virtually this year, which is really cool. And yeah, I'm trying to do some stuff with Morgantown Pride. We're still nailing down some details, but I think this is supposed to be like a queer symposium. It's going to be happening soon. I'll be a part of it. So yeah.
Obviously, it's Pride Month in June. Can you just kind of put into your own words just what that month means to you, both just from what you've learned from the podcast and then just in general?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been working on for the LGBTQ plus center is learning, is like creating videos on queer history. So Pride, this is the 50th anniversary this year of the first Pride Parade, which happened in 1970 in New York City. It was, I think, originally called the Christopher Street Liberation Day. That was the original name of it. But Pride was a riot. Pride was an uprising. Pride was a protest in the 1969 at the Stonewall Inn that night, fighting against police brutality. And so over the years, it's taken a lot of different meanings. In the 80s and 90s, when the HIV/AIDS epidemic was happening, it was a way to mourn for the people that they lost because, so many people were dying at that time and like preventable deaths in a lot of cases. So it was also a time to mourn. And it was a protest at the beginning. And then it became more of a celebration going into like the 2000s and 2010s. And right now, we're just throwing it back this year. Like 1969 was fighting against brutality, police brutality, led by queer people of color, all of these queer people of color that were leading, trans people of color leading these protests and fighting back against the police. So this year, 2020, people are fighting against police brutality, and queer people of color, should be uplifted during this time, especially. So Pride this year is kind of going back to its roots as exposing and, fighting back against institutionalized racism, transphobia, homophobia, all of that. So if anything, Pride is original. It's back to what it used to be. So it's a capital. Like Pride is a way to celebrate, mourn, and protest. And I think this year with these protests, I think it's absolutely authentically Pride.
And earlier in this conversation, you mentioned just the importance of allies and maybe how allies can help in this, march for equality and equity. How can someone be an ally to the LGBTQ plus community? What advice would you have for someone who wants to take that step forward?
Yeah, I say for anyone who wants to be an ally to a marginalized group, queer community, Black community, other people of color, is to know that you don't know everything. It's important as an ally to be able to know when to speak out and know when to stop talking. To be able to, give your, platform, no matter how small it is, someone else who doesn't have that same voice, doesn't have does have the voice, but doesn't have the means of like reaching their message to other people. I think with this current movement that's going on right now, it's allowed a lot of people to get access to resources that, about anti-racism, about, like how to fight back against that and how to change things. Comes from retweeting people on Instagram or retweeting people on Twitter. I'm Gen Z millennial. I should know this, right? Being an ally means, it also means it also is like part of being a good person is to do good even when no one's watching. So that also doesn't just mean retweeting, anti-racism resources just for your group of friends that follow you on Instagram and agree with you. Or I keep saying Instagram and retweet. Oh my goodness. It's not just posting things for people who agree with you. It's important to share those resources, but also it's important to have those conversations with your relatives who might make a racist joke at Thanksgiving, or say a homophobic comment or a transphobic comment about like a celebrity or something. It's also about having those difficult conversations with people in your life and people that you care about who might not understand, what's going on in the same way that you do. So being a good ally means listening It means amplifying the voices of people who don't often get listened to. And it means constantly educating and re-educating yourself. I remember I can't remember her name right now. I can't remember her name, but she was on Oprah and she's an expert on anti-racism. And she said, like, racism is something that's learned. If you can learn it, you can unlearn it. So homophobia can be unlearned. Transphobia can be unlearned. Sexism can be unlearned. So as long as you're constantly educating yourself and reading different resources written by people who are marginalized and, learning when to stop talking, that's absolutely important to, keep in mind.
Very well said. And kind of playing off that in a different direction. You mentioned you kind of started to become comfortable with yourself and your identity as you got to West Virginia. I'm curious if and how the LGBTQ Center on campus helped you with that, or just the benefits of that center in general.
Yeah, so I didn't really go to the center too much, especially when I was a freshman, just because I was still like a little nervous to associate myself with, being gay yet. Not that I was like, I was still like, I understood myself as a lesbian at that time and I accepted that, but I was still kind of nervous. Like I was okay with it, but I was nervous about other people being okay with it. But having the center on campus has meant that we've had really cool events on campus, like, they had like a drag show this past year on campus, and that meant like kids who weren't old enough to go to Vice Versa, which is our local gay bar, were able to see drag queens perform, and they went up through the audience and learn about the history of drag from the director of the center. So it's not just for as a student. The LGBTQ Center has made a lot of awesome events for people that don't even go to the university too. So that center is absolutely valuable for everyone. And as someone who's starting to get more comfortable, who was starting to get more comfortable with the community, these events have helped that with getting to know names, and also eventually some of them were podcast guests. So.
We know you're a podcast star, but I want to now, turn over to your Division I swimming career, and maybe how your student athlete experience has helped you grow, or what you've really gained from being able to be a student athlete.
Yeah, so being a student athlete, it has taught me discipline. It's taught me how to manage my time wisely. So, as someone who is not only a student athlete, but also a podcast host and producer, and I used to work for the student newspaper, and I created videos for them too. And all of I also was a swim coach. I mean, I still am once school gets started again. So I had all of these different things to balance and maintain. And swimming taught me how to stay on time with things, learn how to prioritize what I need to do first. Like I have, this is due tomorrow, this is due tonight at midnight. Like I know what I'm going to be doing first. It's definitely taught me grit. It's taught me, how to dig my heels in when things get difficult. It's helped me get through a hard set. It's helped me get through a hard day with a lot of interviews and editing to do and hard schoolwork. But it's also taught me when to step back and take a break. It's taught me to, like, for example, like, especially when the set's over, and like it taught me the importance of like a warm down, for instance, like taking a break and doing a warm down. Being able to go hard when you need to, but you need to like also warm down the pool, stretch, do yoga, relax. That's important for anyone who wants to be a successful student athlete, but anyone who wants to be a successful person. So, I've learned to my body's limits. For instance, I'm having some finger troubles right now with because I've been working at my computer so much. I've learned to take a break from that and use a pillow, and I just bought a mouse. So learning your limits has definitely been a very valuable lesson that something has taught me that way too.
A pillow. I'm gonna have to follow that one.
I thought that would work. I worked yesterday. My finger hurts less today, which is good. But I have this like little like squishy pillow. Like it's like tiny little pillow that I bought at Kroger of all places. And I just like put it like under my arms, and that way my hands are more positioned to type better. It didn't feel bad today, so I guess it's working, right?
Whatever works. No judgment here.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're going into your senior year. How kind of crazy does that seem? I'm sure it's flown by. And B, what are your plans after graduation? If that's too much to ask, we could skip that one too.
That's all good. I'm just on the cusp of my senior year, so I'm like already have to get used to that question of what do you want to do after graduation. I'm very grateful for the experience swimming is giving me. I'm able to go to a school that I really like, and graduate. Because I'm on scholarship, I'll graduate virtually debt free, which is incredibly valuable in today's world where student debt is horrifying to look at with those numbers. Um, and swimming, it's been a part of my life since I was 5 years old. My first time I ever joined a swim team, I was 5. So I've been doing this. So I'm 21 right now. So I've been doing this for 16 years. This sport has been a part of my life for 16 years. It's crazy to think about. My first swim lesson was when I was like 2 or 3 years old. So I have always been in a pool. It's going to be very interesting to see what my life is like when swimming isn't a huge part of it, you know? And I mean, I'm already kind of getting a taste for that right now because I haven't been in the pool since March. And like I said, I'm very grateful for all that swimming has given me. It's, definitely shaped me into the person that I am today. Like I said, taught me discipline, taught me all of those things. But for after graduation, swimming will still be part of my life. It'll still be like a form of exercise that I'll do. I think it's not the easiest exercise to do. It is not the easiest. But for me, he's done it for so long. Getting back in the water and swimming is probably one of the easiest ways to fall back on to do exercise. You burn so much calories and you get to work out your entire body. Swimming you can do the rest of your life. I'll probably be a wrinkled old lady jumping in a pool at a gym someday. Like I'll do that. Maybe it will be wrinkled because I take care of my skin very well. So But and then, like I said, I mentioned this before we did our interview that I'm doing a grad program. I don't know if I think actually we weren't in that conversation, but anyway, I will be doing a grad program. I'm doing the 4+1 program at WVU, which is a really cool program where basically you can start your graduate degree while you're still an undergrad. So next semester, I will be starting out my grad school year while finishing up my senior year. So I'll have one grad level course and the rest of them undergrad, and I'll take another grad level course next semester. And then I'll use about a year, half a year to take the rest of my graduate credits. And that's why it's called 4+1. And then I'll graduate, walk across the stage, 2 degrees hotter, corny joke. I've been waiting to use that for an Instagram caption for that graduation date, 2 degrees hotter, just to brag a little bit.
I like it. I like it. You've obviously taken a lot from the student athlete experience. You've handled it really well, and you've done the most I feel like you can. You've really made the most of this time. With that in mind, and you kind of mentioned some tidbits earlier, but to incoming freshmen, what would your advice be?
Especially I gotta say for incoming freshmen, you don't have to it's important to work hard, but also learn to have fun at the same time. Sometimes it's okay to step away from the computer, step away from the flashcards, and go watch something on Netflix for a little bit because your downtime is just as important as the time that you're working. You're not going to be a student athlete forever. You're not going to be a student forever. So, go to Fall Fest, go to the PRT cram. It's okay to have fun, but don't make that, and it's big important. Don't make that all encompassing, don't only just have fun. It's all about balance. It's all about moderation. So balance is very important. But one of the things that I've learned is to that working hard is absolutely important, but it's important to also know what your limits are. Because I've worked myself into panic attacks before. I have, and I've dealt with depressive episodes. I have dealt with a lot of mental health issues before, and how I've learned to handle them was simply by just taking a step away from some of your responsibilities for a little bit, so that way they don't weigh down on you too much. That's absolutely valuable. College is it's a very eye-opening experience. You're going to learn and meet a lot of interesting people from different experiences than you, and you're going to have to learn how to get along with all of them. That's absolutely valuable for, life. You're not always going to work with someone that you like. And as an athlete, It's kind of like your first job. It's kind of like your first job when you get out of school. Your coach can be like your boss. Your teammates can be like your coworkers. And it can be a great experience, and you can make it a great experience. So hopefully that did not come off as rambling as I thought it did.
No, I think that was a perfect way to end this conversation. Kayla, thanks so much for joining us and sharing so much of your story about your podcast and yourself, and your just an insight in general. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for, interviewing me and all that stuff. It's an honor to be able to be recognized for my work, and it really does mean a lot. And your time means a lot. So thank you for taking your time out of your day to talk with me.
Of course. Well, that does it for this edition of the College Sports Insider presented by the NCAA. Thanks for tuning in.